So none of these units available here are in here?
No, because Weingarten doesn't advertise those. Yeah, they're still trying to sell their ground lease.
Oh, I thought they did it.
Nope.
Dang it. Okay.
It's not on there. Yeah.
So the fire station over there off of Tejon.
Yep. We're getting $3,000 a month for that.
Yeah, how much was it worth when you guys were looking at it?
Praised for $760,000, I think.
I was just looking at this other one that's over at Raritan.
Yeah.
They're wanting $1 million for it right now.
Yeah. So I can pull the appraisal if you need to see it. It's a little bit
No.
dated.
No.
It's a little dated.
Yeah.
No clicker? Is that?
No, Sam's got it. He's not here.
Oh, Jenny will run the buttons for us?
Yeah, Jenny's going to have to
Oh, here he is.
advance for us. Yes, the clicker.
No. I know what they'll try to do.
I'm not going to be speaking anything right away anyway. With
Building in Raritan.
It's all up to you.
It's all us.
I'm not busy enough.
Mark.
Yeah, again,
It's mostly.
I know.
the redo
And then Jenny will run the rag tool.
they need a showroom. Like,
Yeah.
here's your before and your after.
Yeah, you bet.
A place where people can park and come. And
It's a little fuzzy.
There.
Rubber flooring that they put down in garages now.
well,
Just an eye
all I
test.
know is they wanted that size, a 2-year lease, and I went,
It doesn't look clear?
I can read the top line.
I'm not the best one.
That place right over in the corner. Cross Street. Elati. Cross the street from the gas station, I think. That's the showroom. You know where the gas station?
yeah, the gas station
Yeah, across the street to the west.
used to be the bookstore.
Let me know when we're recording, please.
It's best to see this way because for some reason
I don't know what it was, but I mean, it has like a storefront type of thing, and it's it'd be about the right size. I didn't know. Right in the corner, it's northwest corner.
Okay. There's the steakhouse one. Steakhouse.
Good evening, everybody. If I could get folks to take their seats, we're going to get started here in just a second.
It's just to the south of it.
I agree.
South of the steakhouse
To
den.
the north, excuse me. I guess.
I'll go look.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the City Council study session. Our first agenda item of the evening is our fiscal year 2018 budgeting for community goals. Our city manager, Eric Keck, Finance and Administrative Services Director, Kathleen Wrinkle, and Strategy and Innovation Officer, Mark Wolf, are present to discuss an overview of the fiscal 2018 budget. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Thank you for this opportunity to provide you with the 2018 fiscal year budget kickoff. Tonight, what we're going to do is give you a high-level overview of the work that's transpired to date, as well as lay out the framework for what we hope to accomplish with you on both the 14th and hopefully a subsequent meeting. I want to reserve that for tonight as well. Heretofore, we had a meeting on the 28th, but we're trying to pack a lot in this month, and I know you had board and commission appreciation night down, so we want to talk about that because the work that we need to spend with you is more than just one study session. So the 14th is not going to be adequate. We're going to probably need to have some additional time in order to go through, as you've suggested and requested from us, a review of programs, and specifically those programs that have some sort of change in nature that are going to have an impact on the fiscal year 2018 budget. So getting kicked off here, again, I say this every year it seems, but this year it's no more true than ever, and that is the creation of the budget has been extremely complex, and this year has been the most challenging process I've ever had. And that's saying that with utilization of new tools that we have, including one that you're going to see tonight and have access to, and that's the Resource Alignment Diagnostic Tool from the Center for Priority-Based Budgeting and Resource X. This budget is one in which we followed your prescriptions very closely, Council, and specifically took an approach for the operating budget to ensure that we provide the same level of service and the same programs that we have today that our community has desire for and has a need for. So that mandate has been accomplished, we believe, with the creation of the budget. Having said that again, what we do have for you this evening is a balanced budget, and obviously that's required by state statute, but it's also one that's more structurally balanced than we've ever had before as well, and we'll talk more about that also. So again, what we're doing this evening with this overview is to continue to give you a high-level view of the work that we've taken place thus far in the creation of the budget. So if we want to, we'll jump right into some of the assumptions that were used, and I know Kathy is going to reaffirm this when she goes through, but speaking from my memorandum and cover memorandum that was accompanied the packet tonight, the first thing that we did was, again, look at the maintenance of a 16.7% reserve, and that certainly and clearly is done. You'll see that actually our reserve level is much higher than that, and we're pleased with that. We assume that we're going to have a sales tax revenue growth of 2.6% over the previous year, over the fiscal year that we're currently in. We assume that property tax revenue growth will be about 11.7%. That sounds like a tremendous number in the grand scheme of things. That's over 10% growth, but we keep in mind again that we're a very small number with our property tax. It's roughly, this year was 3.2 or 3.3 million. Next year it's about 3.8 million dollars. So it's not a large figure, but every bit of additional revenue helps. We assume that all other revenue growth was going to come in about 5.6% higher than our current fiscal year. And other revenues are such things as permits, forfeitures, fines, those types of things that you would normally see also with your revenue. Additionally, we're very pleased thus far with the work of our benefits and risk team. Initially, we had a much higher percentage that was anticipated for that particular expense, but it looks like we're coming in about 7.5% right now over 2017, and that is better than the nationwide average right now, which is certainly double digits. We also expect that we're going to have all other expense growth of 3%. And this is normal. That's driven mainly by commodities expenses that continue to grow, and those are everything that we use as raw materials to run the city, but also some personnel costs that are driven largely by our collective bargaining agreements as well. So if we look at the general fund, what we've tried to do this year was come in with two main philosophies. Number one, again, we want to ensure that we optimize the services that we provide today, and that we certainly align those with the 8 community-wide goals or 8 community results. One of the things that we need to be clear about, though, and I want to hit this several times tonight, and you'll hear it and you're going to say, okay, Eric, we've heard you say this already, that when we went into this year's budget process for the operating budget, the general fund budget, and said we're going to maintain the same level of services that we have today in 2017, that's not sustainable moving forward. Need to make that extremely clear. This is 2018 is going to be the last year that we can do what we are doing right now with providing all the services that we provide, the whole gamut. If we were to try to do that again for 2019, we'd have to make cuts, or there needs to be the infusion of additional revenues. End of story. It's just the reality that we're living within. Fiscal year 17, our total revenues were $45,271,363, and as you can see, we're anticipating revenues of about 46.9, almost $47 million. This is $1.7 million over our current fiscal year revenues growth, and you're saying, how is that possible? With everything you've been telling us, Eric, with sales tax. Sales tax is very fickle. Sales tax is very cyclical. And one of the things I wanted to point out again this evening is that our reliance on sales tax is not one in which we should be putting a lot of faith and hope in. Specifically, we're seeing that with demography, the changes in demographics, we're seeing different ways in which people are procuring items. And as you know, unless there is action at the state legislative level to ensure that we actually collect internet sales tax, we're going to continue to see the erosion of sales tax because brick and mortar stores are closing, they're going away. Click and mortar is really picking up speed, and there's no better evidence of that than here in Colorado with the investment that companies like Amazon are making in areas like Thornton as well as Aurora with million-square-foot distribution centers and in the case of Thornton, it's all robotics. Actually, robots go and grab items off shelves and then ship them. It's fewer people and more robotics. But what that means is sales tax is going to decline, and we are seeing an increase in sales tax, but we don't believe it's sustainable. And specifically, if we look at national economic trends, we are within that window in which, again, the normal cycles, historical cycles show that we're going to be hitting a recession again. Hate to use that word, but we need to be prepared for that because that has a tremendous impact on our economy here. So having said that, moving along to within the memo, personnel. I know Council, before the budget process began, you asked that we add 4 additional police officers for actually now and then moving forward into 2018. The political reality or the economic realities of that is that we were not able to provide all 4 of them. We have worked very diligently with Chief Collins and his command staff, and we were able to add 2 officers into this budget, as well as make some structural changes within the department itself to address some other vacancies or other difficult positions that have been hard to fill, such as in the communications area. But the chief feels very strongly, and if you were to ask him, he would tell you that 2 new police officers is a blessing, and he will make that work with respect to enhancing the level of service that's going to happen and be seen in the community. We're also going to be adding another public works operator, equipment operator. This emanated also from Council's desire to see us implement a regular street sweeping program. We certainly cannot do that without the addition of this additional employee to make that full time. And I think our citizenry have also asked for a street sweeping program not dissimilar to Denver, where it's indicated on a regular schedule and when people need to move their cars in order to facilitate that. So that's another area that we added in, and that aids the goal of reliable infrastructure as well as sustainable natural environment. From the standpoint of, cleaning the streets keeps the materials from flowing into our storm drain systems and overtaxing them. And of course, we have requirements with MS4 requirements with EPA and the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment to keep the particulates that are in the air down to a low level as well. And then lastly, we are adding a GIS administrator position within the Information Technology Department, and this is going to aid in good governance. One of the things that we have lacked for a long time is interactive mapping. Mapping that can not only be used internally by our staff, who will be able to use the Geographic Information System called ESRI, but also the public. So this would expand the opportunities for the public to actually see where some of our amenities are and where our services are for the city. For example, if we had interactive mapping, people could hover over a map of the city of Inglewood and hover over Pirates Cove, and it would tell you the hours of operation and even allow for people to buy tickets. And so this would expand our e-commerce as well. So in order to do that, Council, we did have to make way with some other positions that needed to be looked at, and we utilized the resource alignment diagnostic tool as well as analyze those programs to find out where we could make some space or accommodate these new employees. And so essentially 3.25 of employees allocations were eliminated with this proposed budget for 2018. The next area is one that obviously Council is very concerned with, and I'm gravely concerned with, and that's capital projects. We have very limited funding for capital projects. The capital projects list for 2018 was created with 2 main philosophies driving it. First and foremost, we wanted to make sure that we looked at infrastructure that had an impact on the safety of the public, whether it's the traveling public, reliable infrastructure piece, safe and healthy piece for our community. But also we wanted to make sure that we are lengthening the asset life of those projects and that infrastructure that we have today. So again, looking at roadways, looking at our concrete, looking at other infrastructure that we can extend the life of, because it's going to cost more to replace some of our infrastructure if we continue to defer maintenance or defer reinvigoration versus taking care of it now. And so with those 2 goals in mind, we've created a capital projects budget that we'll touch on a little bit tonight, but certainly in much greater detail next week. But I will tell you once again that we had to defer a significant number of projects. There are project requests for 2018 and for the 5-year capital program that I'm required to bring forward to you is underfunded, as you can see, to the tune of about $77 million. So we still have projects within this 5-year window that are gravely important to ensure that we're able to follow up upon and make sure that we are extending their asset life, as well as looking at not building anything new, but just taking care of the assets that we have. And that's a tall order. So this particular gap is significant, and this is one of the policy issues that we'll talk about a little bit later that will require City Council participation in helping to formulate some sort of strategy moving forward on how to deal with this. Lastly, before I get into those themes, I will state that we did spend significant time also trying to include the community workshop forums that were held, the feedback from those workshops into the budget preparation as well. And while funding constraints have been in place, obviously, for this budget year in 2018, we were able to include many of the suggestions that the public made, but then also had to defer many of the things that were requested by the public. Not all the items that came and emanated from these budget workshops were needs necessarily. There were a lot of wants. For example, and I won't pick on the folks at the Malley Center, but a lot of the feedback from the folks at the Malley Center were, we want a new billiard room with a Murphy billiard table and that folds up into the wall, or we want a therapy pool. And those are all expansion of services, or creating new services that we currently don't have today, and we simply couldn't fund those. However, staff did find ways in which to incorporate, ways in which to reinvigorate some of the furnishings along the Broadway corridor, not just the 3400 block, obviously, but the entire corridor that will be in the budget, as well as funding to enhance some of the safety at the Englewood Recreation Center. We have some unsafe conditions that are going to be addressed in this next budget year. But also, we wanted to include funding in the budget for, if not actual projects, but actual research on helping us to achieve some energy reduction goals, as well as some goals towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions that I know many of you on council are interested in, but also the Citizens Alliance for Sustainable Englewood group. And we'll talk more about that on the 21st. So let's briefly talk about the major themes before Kathy jumps into some of the greater detail here. And council, I don't want you to lose sight of these themes as we move forward in this process. Number one, again, is that the city simply does not have enough money to cover all the capital projects needs that we have. So we're going to have to find a way in which, moving forward, to look at not deferring some capital projects, but finding ways and means of funding them. Number two, there were some other position requests this year. Obviously, notwithstanding the 2 additional police officers that you desire to fill, we simply don't have the funding to fill all those positions. And I mentioned in my memorandum to you, and I believe very strongly in this, that we need to continue to look at ways in which to do one of 2 things. Either we become entrepreneurial and we start to provide services for other communities in a greater extent than we do already, for example, at the Service Center with Cherry Hills Village and with City of Sheridan. Or we look at the converse of that and find ways in which we have to admit, we're chasing our tails trying to provide service X. We can't do it very well ourselves, but who around us could provide that service, or we could do some sort of collaboration with another governmental entity or other nonprofit, or even the private sector for that matter, to ensure that we still provide a high level of service but at a reduced cost. Because if we don't see new revenues, we're going to have to do some cost curtailing and cost containment, and the only way to do that, the way that we know that we can do that, aside from eliminating programs altogether, what may be untenable to our community, would be to provide other service providers for that. Third, I think that as a city, we need to do some considerable analysis as it pertains to the general fund operations budget. Again, as I mentioned, we cannot sustain beyond 2018 how we fund our programs and provide them. Either it's going to require cuts to services and programs, or the infusion of additional revenue. Those are the only 2 options I see that we have. And that's a policy issue that only you, council, can answer. Fourth, we need to look at analysis of sales tax again. And what I mentioned earlier again, brick and mortar is going away, click and mortar is growing, and the internet sales are growing, bartering is growing. I've got a neighbor who's trying to barter with me. He needs some mental capital, and he wants to provide me with some physical capital, and that's the way things are going. And people are selling more goods through Nextdoor, Craigslist. There's all these different avenues for people to do that, and we don't have the ability to tax that particular sale or that particular transaction. And so we're seeing a decline, or we'll see even greater decline with that. So we need to find some more sustainable revenue streams, again, to buoy the city's budget. Number 5, one thing that we're going to be doing this year, and I mentioned that it's not a sustainable practice, but it's something that can be relied upon as you look back historically at data, but we are going to be budgeting exactly based on historical performance with our accounting for personnel and when we have a vacancy. So vacancy savings is what we're expecting to glean for this next year, and it's a significant number. I think it's around $300,000. And so we can't expect to see that every year, however, as, again, there's ebbs and flows. In some years we have more retirements or more attrition than others. And so if we go beyond 2018, it may require us adopting a policy that, we delay hiring. And I don't want to get into that position because, again, that hurts customer service, which is one of the hallmarks of our organization. But it is something that's helping us in 2018. Lastly but not least, we also have the issue of eMRF. Council last year studied the issue of Englewood-McClellan Reservoir Foundation and the current lease revenue that we received, and the council decided to make sure that that went into the long-term asset reserve fund. So currently, all the properties that are being leased from Englewood-McClellan, that revenue is going into long-term asset reserve. That policy is actually really quite sound in as much that that long-term asset reserve is actually helping us to maintain our 16.7% reserve, and it's helpful. But we have an opportunity with the 5 remaining parcels, which coming up probably in, if not early September, late September at a study session, you're going to hear from the brokers that you hired, NavPoint, and they're going to give you a summary of options of some economic activity that's been happening down at the Englewood-McClellan area on some potential deals. But we would request, or I would advocate, along with my finance staff, that any further revenues generated by eMRF actually go into the general fund to be utilized for capital projects. Again, we're trying to find sources of revenue for capital projects, and that would be an excellent place for that to transpire, whereas the existing leases would still go into the long-term asset reserve to grow that account for future use for some projects as well. Having said that, I will now relinquish the floor to Ms. Rinkle, who will talk to you in a little bit greater detail about the PowerPoint that you have here before you this evening.
Thank you, and good evening, Council. So what we'd like to do with this is give you a general update of where we were back at the end of March with our assumptions, where they are today, and how that's changed. So we'll start there. Oh, good. Jenny touched the button before I did. So starting on the slide number 2. It says 3 up there, sorry. Okay, 2 in the packet. Look at the retail sales tax, and Eric has covered that it went from 2.0 in our prior forecast to 2.6, and this is changing the income by about $400,000, and it's due to really better economic conditions than we were expecting back in March, and the addition of the retail marijuana revenue, which was not included back in March. The property tax is going from 3 to 11%. As Eric said, that looks like a big number, but it's really only $200,000. And this is a combination of the residential assessment rate change, where we thought it was going to come in at 5.65%. It's actually coming in at 7.2%. And in conjunction with that, we had forecasted that our valuation would only go up 10%. It looks like it's going to be going up about 15%. We'll know for sure on August 25th when the county releases those numbers. All of the revenue went from 1% to 5.6%. This is about $800,000, and basically what we're doing is looking at increasing the fees that we charge in some of the areas. Now, some of this will have to come forward to you for approval, but you can see the notes that we've got up here on the different ones. Total expenditures are, we thought, 3.7%, or excuse me, 3.0%, going up to 4.7%, and that's a total of $1.8 million, and that's due mostly to the premiums on the health care going up to 7.5%, and some inflationary on the commodities and services. On the next page, you'll see the graphs of where we believe we've been and where we're going to go, just based on our current assumptions. So the proposed budget for 2018 is showing that our revenues are very, very close to our expenditures. And I think that's within $15,000. So we've done pretty good there in trying to balance the budget. The budget for 17, again, very close. I think that was an $86,000 difference there. Actuals for 2016, that's where we were able to put the $2.1 million into the reserve. And that's why our expenditures are showing much less than our revenue on that point. But as you go into 19 and 20, you'll see that our expenditures, if we keep going the way we are, providing the services that we do, they far outshadow the revenues. Now, those revenues do not include the EMRF revenues for the additional 5 parcels that Eric was talking about. So if we get that, that would help close the gap. Here's a look at the fund balance based on our current assumptions. And as on our last chart, the last 2 columns were showing the expenses being larger than the revenues. If that continues, that eats into our fund balance. And you can see the, I like to call it LTAR, but Eric calls it the later fund. The blue bar is the later fund. You can see how it grows, and it's pretty solid going through 19 and 20 with the current revenues that we've got coming in. And the unassigned fund balance dwindles as we start digging into it. Sure.
You said that if you go back a couple of slides. Hold on. Go one more forward. Oh, well, I don't know where it went now. Go a couple more back there where you had the oh, it wasn't there then. The gap between the
revenue and the expense?
No, where you said that it was going to make up for it because of the 148. I thought there was this one that said it was, there it is the 148,000 EMR rental incomes. Mm-hmm. And then you said that if we got that income, that would go ahead and close the gap. But on your next slide, there's more than $148,000 gap. So I wasn't sure how you were thinking that was going to close a gap of. You said if we got the EMR funds, that would probably close that gap there. And that doesn't seem to close the gap from the numbers that you have on there for 2000.
So let me slide back to the slide with the green. So the $148,000 there is the current EMRF revenues we're getting that we have allowed to go into general fund here. So the rest of the revenues,
the current EMRF rental income is going to
that $148,000 is built into the general fund. The rest of it goes into the LTAR fund. So
and
that
the amount that's currently going into the later fund is
$1.5 million.
What's projected for 18?
For 18, the $1.5 million.
Same amount.
Because those 5 properties are the same amount every year.
Although that would reduce then you wouldn't be able to back up the.
No, I think what Kathy was mentioning. Oh, sorry.
We've got 5 additional properties that are not yet rented or leased. And when those revenues come in, those are the ones we would like to put into the general fund versus keeping them in the LTAR fund. The LTAR fund would keep the revenues that are coming in.
It's just later fund.
Later, okay.
It's the later fund.
So that's approximately another $1.5 million in addition to the $1.5 million we currently have.
Okay. And the later fund is currently being used as part of the reserve.
Yes.
And it's also being, part of the reserve is also being spent. So, I mean, not all of it, because we've done the supplemental appropriations, some of those have come out of that. So the reserve really isn't like an actual savings account. I mean, the reserve piece of it, once we make a decision, I guess, Mayor, that's something we have to decide is whether that's actually money that isn't touchable, and if we could kind of break out some of those funds, because I'm a little.
Yeah, and I think staff is ultimately looking for some direction on, the future revenue streams from Inglewood McClellan Reservoir Foundation, whether or not those should wholly go into later. Eric and I discussed that a little bit, but we're looking for some council direction on that.
Okay. And that's, so it's the upcoming money that you're looking at potentially
Correct.
closing.
Correct. So going to the chart that has the fund balance again. Okay, so you can see on the 19 and 20, we draw it down just based on the current assumptions that are in this proposal. Those could change as the later rentals come in for the newer properties. So then that would increase the blue bar, or excuse me, not the blue bar, the reserve, because even if we take money out of the later fund at this point, we'd still have to replace it with unassigned fund balance or general fund to keep it up to the reserve, which is the dotted green line that goes across. You can see in 2020 they get very close. The money we have in reserve is very close to, that's it. That's what our policy says.
And I assume that 2020 number does not include any additional revenue from
It does not.
McClellan. Thank you.
Okay. So moving on to the next slide, we wanted to provide you with some numbers so you can kind of see how this falls through. Eric mentioned the two numbers up above, the revenues coming in at $46.97 million, the expenditures at $47.049. Now those expenditures do not include the reimbursement. So if you look at the difference, you're at a negative 104, almost 105,000. The 120 right below that is the reimbursement for interest on the capital leases that are in the public improvement fund, and that's the QCEB, the qualified energy conservation bonds, and the ground lease for the RTD parking. So if you add those two together, the 104.7, that's the gap between the revenue and the expenses, and the 120 that we get reimbursed, the difference between that is only a positive $15,479. That's how closely we've balanced the budget. Now, right below that, you'll see $500,000, and that's what we're asking to have moved to the capital projects fund to help with some of the projects that we need over there. That comes out of reserve. Any questions? Okay. So what we did to get here, and Eric gave you a little bit more detail, is that we have personnel savings of about 3.25 FTEs, non-personnel savings, which are commodities and services, revenue fees increase, and then the human resources was able to negotiate premiums that started at 15% higher than we are today on healthcare, down to 7.5%. The next slide is showing what we're proposing for the capital and the public improvement fund. The $4.153 million plus the $98.8 thousand, that's the funding available in the public improvement fund and the capital projects fund, is a total of $4,252,000. Now that comes from the balance that we carry forward in those two, and you can see down here that we hold a 15% cap reserve. So what's remaining of that carries forward, as well as the vehicle use tax that we get, the building use tax, and the Arapahoe Road and Bridge tax that they pass through. And that's what makes up that $4 million, $4,252,000. We split that between public improvements and capital, and you can see where we've got the transfer out of one into the transfer in of the other. In addition, we are proposing the 500 transfer in from the general fund into the public improvement fund. That we also found in the capital projects fund, the second line, where we have the transfer in from the housing rehab fund. What happened there is they closed the grant, and when they closed the grant, we're able to use that money to however we need to. And that's not needed in the actual housing fund itself, so we're proposing bringing it into capital projects fund, which is appropriate because it's really one-time money. Yes, ma'am.
Where is the number that you said, 4,252,000?
It's a total of the 4,153,000 and the 98.8 in the capital project fund. Top lines of both of those funds.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Rolson.
When did we stop the housing rehab program? Wasn't it several years ago? So you just found this now? This has just been sitting in an escrow account? Wow.
Sure.
Can you find any more of those? That's a lot.
No, unfortunately not. And what we're doing, just so that there is no major concern here, we're required to have a debt service coverage ratio of 1. So right now we need to maintain the ability to cover loans if people don't pay back their loans. Actually, we could have taken $600,000, but we only took $500,000 out of that fund to deal with capital projects. But we do have enough to cover loans, debt, to satisfy the bank requirements for those loans that are remaining. Our default actually on those is very, very low, knock on wood. So hopefully that stays the same. But we have enough to cover that in that fund.
Councilmember Russell.
Did you just say that we ended the rehab fund, the housing rehab fund, in 2006? Then why did we sell properties? Why is it still in the book here? And we just sold properties in the last year for about $160,000. Is that correct?
Yeah. The funding actually came from the federal government. The federal government ended the program. We did not end the program. So we have a fund that's set up for housing rehabilitation, but we don't want to be in the real estate business anymore. You're right. A property did sell. It was at Shenango and somewhere on Shenango. Maybe it's not Cherokee, but Delaware. Thank you, since that's across from your place. But yeah, that place was sold, and that money went back into the housing rehabilitation fund. We're no longer.
That's not the one I'm talking about.
Okay.
There was a property that sold, a couple properties on Wesley.
Oh, the 2 lots, the vacant lots.
Yes.
Yes, and that's the same fund. The same fund owned it. The money went back to that particular fund. And yeah, wherein there is bare dirt, that's what we will try to move. Makes sense. It's no sense us keep holding on to it as an asset.
And so I'm not going to talk about that right now because it's a different topic. Thank you.
Councilmember Barrington.
Well, you said we were out of this since 2006, but in 2014, the expenditures of that program went up from like $700,000 to $1.2 million, and then has remained around $1 million since then, when it was nothing like that before.
We're not doing any housing loans anymore, and that's where that program. That's the genesis of that particular program.
But we have outstanding, perhaps, is
Yes.
the way to understand that.
Exactly.
That we're not, continuing on the program, but we still have economic activity.
We're servicing
Okay.
debt still.
Prior, if we stopped in 2006, I only have information in here from 2011. It was around $700,000, $800,000. Since 2014, it's gone up over $1 million and has remained there for each year. So I'm not sure if we're out of the program. And I see your little funding line here dives down, and I get that.
Yeah.
I get that part of it. But our funding dove down, and you guys knew that it was going to do that in 2006, and yet in 2014 we hugely upped the amount we were spending. So maybe it would be a good thing for.
We'll have an answer for you. We'll have an answer for you next week on that.
Okay, because
we were also part of the neighborhood stabilization program with the federal government, and so I think some of that residual may have also ended up in the housing rehabilitation.
Right, but when
fund.
I looked to go ahead and see what the individual funds were and the monthly financial reports to do that, the last one posted was March of 2017, and so then I went into the tool to go ahead and see if I could find out exactly the money that was coming in and out of this particular one, and that's not possible to get that information out of what we have currently for our transparency in that. So I guess I'll just have to meet with you and go over that, because that's huge. I mean, when you have a dive that much of income and you have that much of an increase while it's diving in your revenue and have that much of an increase in what we're spending, then it does need a further explanation. So
We'll
I
get some detail
appreciate
for
that.
you.
And the properties that were sold.
What was the name of the fund?
And it wasn't dirt. There was a home on it. There was demolition that was done on that property on Lot 1 on Wesley, and now that it's been subdivided, so we need to find out all what we're doing.
Sure. Sounds like you know,
There
a
you
little
go.
bit of different issue on those particular properties, and perhaps
But I
staff
think-
can get us some information on that. And
Right. I
what
think
was
what
the-
they already
hold on just a
agreed
second.
to
what was
was-
the previous name of the fund that we used to fund these projects again?
This was the Housing Rehabilitation Fund.
46?
46.
Thank you. 45 and 46. That's right. Correct. Thank you. That's what I was looking for, those numbers. Sorry, Councilmember Barrington.
No, so we're just, maybe we could spend some time if you want to show me individually, or you want to bring that to council, because it's that's a huge shortfall there, and a ton of money that's going out, and I don't know what it's for.
Happy to
And
spend
I'm
time.
not seeing the income from where the properties are being sold, nor apparently are we we need a better track.
We'll be able to provide that tracking for you.
All right. Moving on, I would like to just give you an overview of what to expect for your next 2 meetings on the 14th, and I think one to be determined. So continuing along the lines of providing you with a program-based presentation, again, going back to our discussion about really continuing to implement, continuing to implement our priority-based budgeting. We'll be focusing on the programs that we've outlined that you can see in the RAD tool. And so what our departments have done is using a template that you can see up on the screen that you'll have access to in your packets beginning at the end of this week. You will have a summary of each of the programs that we will be presenting to you. You will also have sheets that describe each of the capital projects. So hopefully what this does is give you much more comprehensive information on the critical programs, anything that we increased or decreased, especially as it relates to balancing this budget, and any of the major policy assumptions that we made, to try to build in to this budget. Now, some of those are based off of the presentations that we provided to you back in May and June. Some of those we had to utilize input from you over the course of the year on other topics. This is a great opportunity for us to have, before the public hearing when you get a final budget proposal, to have an interaction with staff on those assumptions. And so we'll present to you what our assumptions were. There is also a section in these sheets to outline all potential alternatives. So if there is something that you'd like to alter in the budget assumptions on the 14th and the meeting to be determined, you'll be able to provide that input to us, and we can make those changes prior to the quote final budget proposal. So what you can expect in your packets is a number of these sheets. You'll have the capital project sheets and program sheets. What we're proposing to do is essentially split those out, starting on the 14th with the capital budget, going through the major projects, and then similarly, if we have time, begin on the quote operating budget or the program sheets. You will not have a sheet on all programs. That is over 400 programs. We'd like to get there. We were not able to get there quite yet this year. But what you will see is several dozen between your capital projects and your program sheets. Hopefully this will provide you a lot more detailed information than you can get just from going into the RAD tool. And this way you have a chance to interact with the departments and ask questions about those programs. But for those 2 meetings, that will be an intensive budget presentation. That is the show, so to speak, for the budget presentation for us. We're not planning on coming back and doing department presentations individually again in September. We feel that that's been covered back in earlier this year. You will be hearing from most, if not all, of the departments through these program sheets. But again, this will guide you through the major policy assumptions throughout this budget. This way we can hone in on really those major issues. You pointed out a couple tonight that absolutely we'll talk through and go from there. And I'll just mention, if there are any other issues that when you get your packets later this week that you don't see are scheduled to be specifically discussed that you would like further information or discussion on, please let us know, and we're happy to provide that.
So as an add-on to the detail that Mark is talking about for the next meeting, we'd like to also let you know that starting tomorrow morning, we'll have the OpenGov loaded with the 2018 budget, so you can start looking at it by line item. That's where that'll be. It'll have the department information. It does not have the program information in it. That you will have to get through the RAD tool. Okay. So with that in mind, we'll take a look at the budget cycle for the next steps. We've got the 14th set aside to cover most everything we can in the budget presentations. We've got the 21st proposed, but we will most likely need more time than what's allowed on the 21st because we've only got the 1-hour study session. So that's where the meeting to be determined has been noted by Eric and Mark. September 8th is when we'll have the proposed budget book to you. September 18th is the public hearing. And then we'll have the first reading of the ordinances on the 2nd and the second reading on the 16th. And that's the current schedule at this point. With that, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Jenny, and she'll walk you through the RAD tool.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, just to highlight again regarding budgeting for community goals, it's a methodology that we're using to develop the budget for 2018 and beyond. This form of budgeting assists us in answering the question, why is the city in business? The city programs that are identified either in whole or in part support the community goals that we have identified as the community, as well as good governance, which is our 8th community goal. Program costs are estimated by looking at your prior year budget. So we're looking at the 2017 budget, and we're allocating personnel as well as non-personnel costs to each of our programs. And through the scoring process, budgeting for community goals allows us, or it helps us to prioritize our city programs in terms of their quartile ranking. So last year when we were here, it's hard to believe it was over a year ago, Resource X had only one RAD tool system, and it's the online PBB.net program. They've added 2 additional online tools for us to use. The Present PBB is more of a high level, more for citizens, city council purview, and the Dash PBB has a more filtered approach for departments. But tonight I'm just going to go over the Present PBB as well as the online PBB, so you get a flavor of what the tool has to offer you in terms of our programs and scores. So Kathy had sent out tonight your online username as well as password, and so feel free to log in if you'd like to tonight along with me, or at your leisure go into the system tonight or during the week. And also provided to you is a link to a YouTube video that the Resource X put together in terms of highlighting the new features of the RAD tool, as well as some other features of our program scoring and whatnot. So you'll notice that I'm going to be logging into Google Chrome. That's one of the better browsers to use with this tool. Oops. So in the address box bar, all you have to do is type in online. If you can type, PBB. I'm going to log in as myself. Goodness. This is the hard part.
Everybody's watching.
I know. Just want to go into here. Oops, present. So we're going to be in Present PBB first, and just the home page that you're going to go to, you'll see these little icons, and they're going. If you just click on any one of them, you'll see the other communities that are using Center for Priority-Based Budgeting and ResourceX. And where we're going to be tonight is under the Priority-Based Budgeting menu item. If you click on just PBB Overview, it'll give you a high-level graphic view of our spending in terms of our governance as well as our community goals. So currently, the 2017 budget, we're spending across all funds 24% towards governance, and 76% of our spending is towards our community goals. The next two break down by department, our community spending versus our governance spending. Again, this particular view is across all funds. You could change that view and just look at the general fund, for instance, if you wanted to. And our governance in the general fund is about 17% of our total budget, as compared to 83% is for community goals. And then your department spending accordingly. The result definitions we provided in our packet in the appendices, all of our results as well as the definitions of those results. They're the little bubbles around the center result, but you can also get that information here on the tool itself. So if you forget your PowerPoint presentation, you have it here at your fingertips. You can also look at your spending towards results. And last year, when we were provided this information, you're going to notice when we were talking about the leveraging of dollars, because we are comparing our programs against 7 community goals as well as our 5 basic program attributes, you're going to see that our spending does cross, and it will be multiplied, depending on how many or what percentage of our dollars for those programs affect the 7 community goals. So you will see some of that leveraging of dollars across the community programs. So those dollars might be spent a few times. So you're not going to see a nice pie chart as one would expect when you're looking at across all your community goals and all your programs at the same time. But what's kind of nice here, you'll see in terms of all of our departments, and again, you're looking at all departments, all funds, and you're seeing what percentage has a strong percent or strong influence towards safety or a livable community. You'll also see some of the programs that have some influence as well as no influence or no contribution to those results. What's really nice about this particular tool, you can actually drill down and get down to the program level. So if you're just wanting to look at those programs that have a strong result, again, you could change your view by just clicking on your sum or none. But if we go back to strong, you can then break down those results by department, and then you can actually look at the particular programs at the police department that actually affect a safe community. And then you can go down one more level, and you can actually see the scores, the overall scores, by the 5 attributes as well as the 7 or 8 community goals, I should say. Oops. Yep.
If you go back to the where you had like the police that
Yep.
was broken down.
So if you go
previous. So for, say, the fire marshal there, is that only to how much it, just do on the fire marshal again, just as an example?
Yep.
So that little,
So the
is
482,000?
that only for one section of it, or is that the whole cost of that department?
That would be the whole cost of that department that's attributable to safety. So if we were to,
That answered my question.
did that? Okay. So again, you can go back, and this is kind of a, just a really nice at your fingers system, so you can see in total what our budget is, and then the community programs cost as well as their scores, everything that is right there at your fingertips. Again, you could look at your governance and see, best practices, what programs are dealing with best practices. And again, this is crossing all funds. That's why you're seeing the Littleton Englewood wastewater treatment plant, because we're the administrative arm of that particular service. Okay. The other tool, the analysis tool pack, this is similar to the online PBB that we'll be going over just here shortly. This one is going to show you in terms of the total 2017 budget. Again, this includes the Littleton Englewood wastewater treatment plant. Now, if you just wanted to look at the general fund, again, you could look at any of those funds. And you'll see those programs that are in quartiles 1 and 2, those are the ones that highly influence the outcome of your results. Programs that are in quartiles 3 and 4, they have some effect, but maybe not as high of an effect on the outcome of your results. And again, we're basing program costs on not only on just the community results, but also 5 basic program attributes in terms of is the city the only provider of the service? Is there cost recovery? Has the demand increased or decreased for that service? Again, that information is also in your packet. And here you could just look at, if you wanted just to change your view and just look at your quartiles 3 and 4, you just simply uncheck, and you'll see what dollar amount we're looking at in terms of those program costs. And if you wanted a printable report, you just click on your table view. Oh, do you? Okay, all right. Well, anyway, you can print this out via an Excel spreadsheet. So let me just jump over to online PBB, because this will give you a little bit more information. What's a little bit different here, the system is pre-filtered with 5 policy questions that are of interest not only to city staff but also to council members. And again, you can start looking at a programmatic view of, are we providing too high mandate programs with low relevance? So are we providing something that maybe we don't really necessarily need to do because it's not required by the federal government, it's not required by the state or a charter, but it's something that maybe an ordinance could be changed. Again, you could look at those programs that fit that criteria. And then there's some other, policy questions that, again, just gives you food for thought in terms of, are there some changes that we could make in the services that we're providing? The only other thing that I wanted to show that there are just some quick reports. I won't generate this report, but this summary all would give you a complete detail of all the programs that we have here at the city that are in the system. Gives you the scores, based on the quartile. It also provides their quartile rating. What else is good? And then what's a bit different from this resource alignment view is you can get just, again, snapshots or rad snapshots of particular things that you're interested in seeing in terms of, are you just wanting to look at what programs are only served by a small portion of the community? You could change that view. And then you could just get a download of the current snapshot of what the of the programs within the quartiles, as well as their cost and scores. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I'll suggest that any council members with more specific questions on this particular tool follow up with staff directly and perhaps get some direction there. Obviously, council will need to pick up this conversation at our next meeting. I did want to just highlight a couple of questions or thoughts, perhaps for not necessarily to be answered right now, but just to laundry list out that maybe we can pick up a little bit on next time. The 3.25 FTE elimination, I assume, was handled through attrition of open positions. I'm wondering which positions were eliminated. The McClellan Reservoir lease revenue to later, I think that's something that the council needs to discuss and come to some consensus on at our next meeting. So perhaps get your thoughts on that. My thought is that we want to replenish the later to the high water mark, and then in my mind, additional revenues from there makes sense to go back to the general fund. But that's something we can discuss and try to get some consensus on. I saw the notation of increase in fees. I'd like to see which fees were increased. So maybe just a list of those. You suggested that we'll get just a couple of dozen programs to evaluate through the quartile system, if you will. Yes. Does that make sense? Yeah. How did you choose those couple dozen, maybe just real quickly? Is that...
They were the larger programs that had some influence, either up or down. We've done a lot of heavy lifting, obviously, council, as required by charter in my role to prepare this budget. But we're bringing forth a couple dozen programs that had either increases or decreases, so you can see exactly why we made some of the decisions we did.
Great. I'd like to get an idea also of EMERF future revenues. I think we have an idea of that, but I think if we start to include that in some of the modeling, once council makes some decision on that, that might be helpful to understand, either by putting it into the general fund or by, putting into that later, which I think is what that slide was showing, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Finally, I'll just end on a quick note about retail sales. I certainly agree there's a mega trend towards online sales, but I'll point out that even though our market share is dwindling of the real market, the increase in real dollars is very real. You see a 4.8% increase citywide or statewide. We're seeing substantial increases here in the city, and historically we've served our residents very well by being a place that people can come to do business, to shop, to eat, those kind of things. And I think that that type of thinking will keep us in a good spot moving forward. Councilmember Barrington, anything to wrap us up here?
Well, there's a couple of things, but I thought we weren't going to do this right now. But he brought up the FTEs. Could you go ahead and give us some kind of understanding of what the FTEs are? And please make sure that you include the equivalent for the fire department and the things that we've gone ahead and contracted out. And then I have a couple more, but we don't really have time.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Talk about dates and having that additional date now or in there?
In there, I think.
In there, I think. We're out of time.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and adjourn this and pick it up next door in just a couple minutes. Thank you, everybody.